Hello, class. Hello, Jay. All right, let's wait a couple more minutes here and get started. In case more people want to join. Hey there, Marco. All right, we'll wait one more minute, 6:05, and get going. All right. Welcome everyone. We're going to be starting module 10. This is going to be the last module that has to do with the server-side component. So that includes Node, Express, and MongoDB. So starting next week, we're going to be moving to the client, and we're going to go from there. Module 10 is about token-based authentication and authorization. This covers the topics of securing your web APIs. As you've seen so far, we haven't really talked about authentication or security or being able to secure your endpoints to only authenticated accounts. So that's what this week is all about. I also want to mention that your final project options are available. Please read through them. I don't want to go through them today, but I will next week, just because of the amount of things we gotta go over today. But go ahead and review those two options. And if you have any questions on them, we will discuss them next week. All right. Before I get started on module 10, are there any questions on the labs that we have done in the past? Jocelyn, hello, Jocelyn, welcome. Any questions on past labs, anything like that? Okay, so let's go ahead and get started on authentication and authorization. We'll also be covering restructuring your Node applications. So we'll actually do that first, and then we will move to authentication. See here. Yeah. Okay. All right. So if there are no questions or anything like that, I will get going on the examples. All right. So I have here the task application that we have been doing. And this is the one where we finished last week with adding MongoDB schemas. So we added the user's schema, and this was a schema we added last week. And we also talked about uh, filtering, sorting, and being able to get a subset of what you want from MongoDB. So that's what we have right now. The thing I'm going to do first is I'm going to talk about restructuring your application. So far we have put all our code in the index dot AS file. For a very small application, or for the kinds of examples I'm doing in class where it's just a short bit of code, it's okay to put that in the index.js. However, as your application gets larger and larger, you'll find that it's not ideal at all to have all of your code in one file, right? As you can imagine, we just have two schemas right now, and we have the CRUD operations for those two schemas. And just that code, as you can see, we have about 300 lines of code, right? Just for those two schemas and whatnot. So as you can imagine, putting everything in one file like this is not ideal. So the idea here is we want to structure our applications, meaning we want to create folders and place common components of your application in those folders, and we want to link out from those folders into other applications in your app. So things are a lot easier to find, right? When you want to look for something. Okay, so we're going to begin by moving the MongoDB connection to its own file. Okay, so that's this code right over here. And for that, we're going to create a new file. And we are going to name it database.js. And we're just going to cut and paste, right? We're just going to cut that code out and we'll paste it in there like that. Okay, so what we also need to do here is, since this is its own file, we are referring to a Mongoose here, and Mongoose is not imported here. So that's what we need to do first. So let's create a new constant, and we'll name it the same thing. Mongoose equals require Mongoose. Right, so that's going to ensure that this connect will work. Now we can remove it from the index file. Right? We can also remove the Mongoose from the index.js file. So this can be removed. So you might ask yourself, if we are making the connection to Mongoose in this file here, how does that connection remain if we need to connect to MongoDB using our endpoints? The way it works is when you import, for example, Mongoose here, if we import Mongoose again in some other file, for example, if we import it here, we get the same instance. So it's not going to create a new instance every time we do require Mongoose. There's only one instance. So when we import it in here and we connect, this Mongoose instance is going to be the same instance that gets imported when we want to import it in some other location. So that's why we could put the connection in here. Now, when we do that, though, however, we need to refer to this file from the index file. So when your application starts up, it loads this file so it can make the connection. Because if you don't do that, then it's not going to know about this file here, right? Remember, this is your starting point. Index is your starting point. So what we're going to do is we're going to say we'll create a constant. We'll say database equals require, and we'll refer to a local folder and database.js. Okay, so let's run it, make sure application still works, and we are getting errors. The mongoose is not okay. Yeah. So the reason why we're getting mongoose is not defined is because we haven't moved this code out here, and we are still referring to it. So that's why we're getting that error. But if we temporarily add it here, that error should go away. Okay, so as you can see, it says connected, which means that our connect here is good, right? We are getting connected, right? So that's that. Okay, so next thing we want to do is we want to move our APIs, our endpoints or endpoint handlers to their own folders. Okay, so we have two, right? We have the to-dos, right? We have the to-dos that deal with the task application. And last week we created the user endpoints, right? These endpoints right over here. Okay. So what we want to do is we want to create a new folder, and we're going to call this routes. And inside of this routes folder, we're going to create two files. So we'll create one file here, call this todos.js. Okay, so all the endpoint handlers that have to do with the to-do application will live here. And we also have the users endpoints. So we need to create another file in here called users.js. And these are going to be all out of our user endpoints. Okay, so now that we have these two files, let's move the code in their respective location. So first, let's move all of the thought operations having to do with the to-do. So that begins from here. And it goes all the way down to the delete, right? All the way to here. Right, so we are gonna Control X that out, cut that out. We're gonna go to the to-dos and we're gonna put that in there. Okay. So we need to do a few things here to make sure our index is aware of the to-dos. The first thing is, you see here, we are referring to the app, right? This is the Express app that we created in the main text file right over here. However, we cannot create another Express app instance in these, because if we try doing that, then we are going to create a new, it's like creating a new Express application, and these endpoints will be added to that Express application, and this Express application will be distinct from that. We don't want to do that, right? We want to have a single app instance, and we need to be able to add these endpoints to that same app instance. So what we're going to do here is we're going to first import Express. So that's something we need. So we're going to require Express. However, we're not going to create a new instance. Okay, so we imported Express. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a router object. So we're going to say const router equals express dot router, like that. So now this is the object we add our our endpoints to. So instead of app, we refer to outer. So let's just go ahead and replace all the app to router like that. Okay. So that takes care of that, but we still need to be able to export, right, all these endpoint handlers out of this file, right? Because remember, in Node.js, all the code that you put in a JS file is scoped to that file, right? So we need to export this router object out of this todos.js file. So we're going to say module exports equals router. That's going to export out all those endpoint handlers. All right, so we did that to the to-dos. Now we have to do the exact same thing to the users endpoints. So let's go ahead and cut and paste the user endpoints out of here. And they begin from this point and all the way down here. So we're going to do a cut. We're going to paste. We are going to get the instance of Express and this router object, and it's going to go at the top like that. And we're going to replace all the apps with the router object. That, and then finally, we're going to export. Module exports equals to router. Okay, there we go. All right, so that takes care of that. Now, we still need to let our index know about these, right? Because right now our index has no idea what where these are, right? It doesn't know about these here. So we need to import them. So we're going to come up here. We're going to create const. We'll call this to outs equals to require. And now we're going to refer to the routes folder, and we're going to refer to the todos.js, right, the file that we just created right over here. And we're going to do the same thing with the other one. So user routes equals require the routes folder users.js. Now that we have imported them, we need to direct the requests to them. Okay, so we still have one more thing to do here. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the app use. Okay, we're going to say app use, and we're going to say we're going to refer to to-do routes there, and then we're going to do app use again, and we're going to refer to user routes there. Okay, so just again to show you what happens when we get a new request, right? The request is gonna, you can think of it coming from the top down, right? So the request is going to go into this handler, right? This is going to serve statics, right? Statics. And then it's going to go to this handler, right? Which is going to, if it's ASON request, it's going to convert that to an object. And then after that, it's going to be sent to our to-dos routes, right? And the to-dos routes are defined up here, and they are in this file here. And that file is right over here, right? So the request will then be redirected to the handlers that are in to-dos. And then if the URL path is a API having to do with the to-dos, then one of our handlers in here is going to take care of that and give a response. If no handlers are defined here, right, then that request gets sent to the next handler, right? Then it goes to these routes, right? And those are defined up here in this file here, and that file is defined there. Okay. So that's the idea there. Okay, so we did that. So that's going to handle the API, the web APIs. So what we want to do also, though, we want to move these schemas out of here as well. And for that, we're going to create another folder here in the root. There, actually, we need to create it in the root. And we're going to name this folder models. Okay, and these are going to be our MongoDB schemas, right? We have two, right? So we're going to add a new file. We have the to-do schema, right? And we have the user schema, user.js. Right? We have those two schemas. So let's go ahead and move the code that has to do with the to-do schemas, which starts from here and goes all the way to here. So we're going to cut that out. That's going to go there. In this file here, we need to import Mongoose because we are creating a new Mongoose schema there. So let's do that. Const Mongoose equals require Mongoose. So that's going to take care of that. And then we need to export this auto out from this file. So instead of having this assigned to this constant to-dos, we're just going to say module exports, and we're going to set it equal to that. So this is what gets exported out. Oops, so that takes care of the to-do schema. And we need to do that to the user schema as well. So that's just this schema right over here, all the way to here. We're going to cut that out. Users, paste that in there. We need to import Mongoose and require Mongoose. Right, so that's going to take care of this instance of Mongoose, and we also need to export this out. So module exports equal to that. Okay. So that moves the code for our schemas there. However, if we go back to our endpoint handlers, which are here, to-dos and users, you'll see that we are referring to the schema, right? We are referring to this object here to do, right? To do defined, to do defined by ID, to do a save, all that stuff, right? So since we moved all the code out of here, we need to now import it in this file here. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so we're going to come up here. We're going to create a new constant. We'll name it to do like that, just like how it was spelled here. And we're going to set this equal to require. And now we have to move up one folder and into this folder, right? Because we are going to refer to a folder starting from where this file is, right? So we're going to do // right, which is going to move up one, which is going to move to the root of our application. And then we're going to go into the models folder and then refer to the to-do.js. And we are again referring to this file. So that's going to handle all of these. And we have to do the exact same thing to the users. So we use the user there. So it's have that here, const user equals require dot slash models user.js. Okay, and I know I made a lot of changes. Let's see if it will compile. So as you can see, our main index file now just has this information, right? It does not have any code per se, right? At least no real code, right? It's just so when we view our applications, when we open up the index, the whole idea behind this should be we just want to get an idea of where things are, right? That's going to be our goal here. All right, so let's stop this and start it and see if it'll still work. And looks like everything still works. Right? We can add and remove everything, anything you want, and let's go. No errors, right? So again, the whole idea behind this index file is when we refer to it, we should be able to kind of get an idea of what's going on, right? We have an Express application. We are using Mongoose, so we're dealing with MongoDB. Things that have to do with their DB is going to be located in that file. We have two endpoint handler objects here, right? We have something to handle something to do with to-dos, and then we have another handler having to do with users. Right? Yeah. And then things, if you want to find them, are a lot simpler to find, right? If you want to find your, if you want to find your schemas, you go in here, click on the to-do. This is the to-do schema. This is the user schema. If you want to get to your web APIs, they're in this folder. You go here, and you get to your web APIs. All right. There is one more thing that we could do here. It's not something you have to do, but it helps sometimes. And that is, we can move out the common path of our web APIs out to the main index file. So what I mean by that, if we click on the to-do handlers, you see that we have a common path here, right? This /API/to-dos. It exists in every handler that we have, right? It exists there, it exists there, there, and there, right? So what we could do is we can move this out. So I could cut that out like that. And I can go to my index.js and here, when I do app use, I can put the starting path right here, like that. When I do that, though, I need to now remove this path from all the endpoint handlers that I have here. So remember what was in this get was that. So we remove this, but we can't just leave an empty string. So we just put a slash. This part can be removed, and that just leaves /ID. This here turns into a slash. This here turns into a /ID, and this turns into a /ID. Okay, so now it's a sort of like a dual-edged sword here, because when you view this file, you don't get the full URLs. So you don't know what the full endpoint path is going to be for any of these, because the first part of the path is now here, right? The first part of the path is here. The advantage, though, is that when you view your main file here, main dex.js file, you can see that if the URL starts with /API/todos, then all of the API handlers are going to be here. Okay, so I don't know if it's good or not, but it is something you could do. All right, so here what I'll do is I'll leave this to-dos one using this format, and I'll leave this one using the full. Actually, you know what? I should really do that. So I think I'm just going to go ahead and remove them from here as well. So let's move out API/user. So they're all the same. I don't want to have two different sort of syntax in this app. So it turns into a slash, turns into that, that turns into that, and I think that's it. Back to the index, we put the starting path there, just like that. Okay, so something, like I said, just to keep in mind that when you are viewing these endpoint handlers here and you see a slash here, right, what you have to do is you have to take into account the starting, the base URL. And that base URL is going to be over here, right? So /API/todos, you combine it with this, and that becomes your endpoint. All right. So let's make sure the application still works. And it looks like it does. All right. Any questions on this? Oh, I just saw that question there, Jocelyn. So it's like yeah, that's right. So it's like ICE, it's ICE base, base. The only thing you got to keep in mind, though, is that all of these endpoints here should have the common path here, right? Because if they don't, then when a request comes in and the base URL is not this, then it's not even going to go into this file here. So if you have an endpoint handler in that file, it won't even hit that file. So that's something to take into account. Right? So when you do something like this, you just have to make sure that this base URL should apply to every endpoint handler that you have in here. All right. So that's the only catch there. All right. Any other questions? I just realized we can remove this mongoose constant from there and just all right. Very good. Okay, so let's start on. Oh, just saw your question, Marco. So the idea is modularize all the parts from a single file to be a single job. I don't know if you can call it a job, but yeah, the whole idea is we don't want all of our code to be in one file. That's not ideal, right? For a very small example application or something, it's fine. But when your application grows, like if you can imagine, you might have, I don't know, 10 things that you have to have your web APIs, right? And each one of them might have 5 or 6 of them, right? So you end up with a lot of endpoint handlers, and having them all in one file, of course, is not ideal, right? You got to scroll through, you got to use Control F to find things. So by doing it this way, right? If you need to get to a specific endpoint handler, you know at least where it is, right? You expand the folder, you go to the specific one, and then you just gotta look through that one file. Okay? All right. All right, let's go ahead and start on authentication. Sure. All right, so again, I said this when we first started. This is going to be the final server side component that we do. So this is going to end Node, Express, and MongoDB. So starting next week, we're going to move to the IAM side. All right, so authentication. So far, all of our endpoints have been public. Even if your application has a public component to it, you will still need a way to secure your endpoints, or at least some of them. And for that, we use the concept of authentication and authorization. Authentication is used to control who has the access, so it's the who component, and authorization is used to control what a user has access to. In this class, we will be using token-based authentication authorization for securing our endpoints. The key to understanding authentication or security in general is to fully understand the definitions and terms commonly used in this area. So let's define some of them. So first, authentication is the concept of verifying a user's identity to ensure a user requesting access is who they claim to be, right? So in the real world, this would be like somebody asking for your ID, and they look at your ID to see if the photo is the same as you, right? So that's the authentication part. Authorization is the concept of what resource the user has access to. This is oftentimes based on the user's role in the system. And the definition of a role specifies the granular level of access for a user. So sometimes these roles are based on access levels. For example, super admin would be the highest level, and then below that would be an admin, and then below that would be a power user, below that would be a standard user, and then below that might be a S access or a view only or something like that. And sometimes they are task-based. For example, you might have a page creator, page editor, report, right? Somebody who can just export out, reports. And sometimes they can be a combination of the two. Okay, so this decision is based on the system design. Okay. Access token is a signed piece of data that the server sends a client after a successful authentication attempt. It may contain the user's level of access. This token is then sent back to the server with each request for something secure. And when we have a token, they can also expire. Okay, so the idea behind a token is that the server will use a secret key, we call that a private key, and it will use that key to not encrypt, but to assign something which uses that key for that signature algorithm, and that becomes the authentication token that is then sent to the client. And when a client is trying to make a request to something secure, that same authentication token that the server had signed is then sent back to the server, and the server can then take a look to see if the server was the component that signed it. And if it is, then we know that the server is the one that assigned that user that authentication. So with that, we have token-based authentication, which is the concept of allowing access to a secure resource based on tokens. We have hash or hashing is the one-way process of generating a mostly unique set of random characters from some information, whereby guaranteeing that piece of data will always generate the same hash, but never in reverse. Okay, so we use this when we want to store something secure, because when we take the actual information and we do, for example, an MD5 hash or a SHA-256 hash, what that does is that hashes that content into something that looks like this. But the idea here is that we cannot reverse this. So we can't go from this random hash back to the actual information that's stored, which is good. That's what we want, right? Because if we want to store something secure, that if that gets out, right, it's not, we don't want it to be able to be reversed, right, to the actual information. So, for example, the MD5 hash of the string ABC123 will always hash to this. Okay, so this is the hash for this specific string. But we cannot take this hash and come up with what was used to create that hash. Okay, so that's the idea there. Okay, salt or salting is a unique random set of characters added to a password before it's hashed to ensure that two of the same passwords don't produce the same hash. And more importantly, it makes brute forcing attacks a lot more ethical to do. Okay, so the idea behind this salt is that we take what we want to hash and we add something to it before we hash it, and that's something that we add, we ideally want it to change each time. And what that's going to ensure is that the hash that we come up with is always going to be unique, and not the same when we hash two of the same thing, right? So that's the idea behind the salter salting. Okay, then we have the private key, which is a unique key stored on the server that is used to secure or sign and verify. We have signing, which is the process of securing data, which we want to make it tamper resistant, and this is done using the private key. And finally, we have the authentication strategy, which is method of authentication and authorization. And with RESTful API, we often use token-based we often use the token-based authentication strategy. So why token-based authentication? A token can be thought of as a stamped ticket. The server stamps or signs a piece of data to establish ownership. And then it verifies when that ticket is received back to the server. There are a few reasons why we want to use token-based authentication. First, it is stateless. So with token-based authentication, where I reside. Okay, so token-based authentication is stateless in nature, so they are perfect candidates for something like the REST API. And that's because when the server sends the client this authentication token, the server does not have to remember that, right? The server just comes up with that authentication token. It could store things inside of it, like when it was created. So if we wanted to expire after a certain amount of time, for example, the date and time is part of it, right? So when it sends that out, right, it doesn't need to keep track of it. It doesn't need to remember it. And when that token is then received, the server could then decode it and see when it was created, if it was created by the server first, and then when it was created. And then if that comes back okay, then whatever access that user was trying to get with that token is then is added. Okay. It is also flexible, so they can be used and stored on the client, because a token is just a long random string. Okay, so it's very simple to store. And control. So tokens can contain data and state that control access to a specific resource based on the user's role. And remember, REST is stateless. So once the server finishes sending data to the client, it forgets everything about the client. And a token can contain state that the server may need. Okay, so we can use the token to actually store some state. And we have all pretty much used this concept of token-based authentication. For example, if you go to a bar or concert or some event, you might have to first, when you're trying to go in, you might have to first show your ID. So that would be the authentication component. And then after that, they might give you something like a wristband. And then once you get this band, then you can actually go in. So the question is, why do we need this here? Do we have to have this or not? And the short answer to that is we don't really need to have this. I mean, the main reason why we have this is convenience, right? Because in theory, right, what we can do is we can just not even do that, right? And each time we want to gain access, we just show our IDs. But that's not convenient and it's slow, right? Because each time we need to confirm if it is who we say we are before we gain access. Now, on a web application, what that would imply is that every request you made, which means every click you make to something, if that something is secure and we didn't have a token, then it would prompt you for your username each time, username and password each time, for each click, right? And of course, that's not convenient. We can't do that. So instead of doing that, right, we do that one time, and the server sends us this authentication. Okay. And then all we need to do is whenever we're trying to make an access to something secure, we just send that authentication token along with our request. With that way, we don't have to constantly put in our username and passwords every time. Right? So that's the idea behind this here. And as far as how this looks from the request response standpoint, the client, right, will do a authentication request. So this could be something like a host request to this web API, and along with this request, we're gonna send the server our account, right, our username and password, and the server is then going to make sure that I have an account, number one, right? And if I do, then it's going to create a authentication. Okay, and that authentication token is going to be sent back to the client, right? And the client is going to store it. So the client is going to store this thing here. And then when the client wants to make a request to something that is secure, what the client is going to do is it's going to make that request. So for example, let's say this API/users needs to be secure. And then it's going to send the authentication token in the header of the request in this format. So we put that in the authorization head component, and we add the authentication token type right before it, which is a pair. So authorization pair, and then the actual token there. So this is the same token that the server sends. And then what the server is going to do is it's going to take a look at this token. It's going to first confirm, was it me who created this, number one? If that comes back okay, then number two, has this token expired? And if it has not expired, then we are good. And then the server is going to give the response. Okay, so when it comes to adding token-based authentication to our applications, these are going to be the steps we need to take. So first, we're going to need the user registration, right? So this is where the user actually writes a new account. So we need to create a user account and hash the password for storage, right? Because if we're going to store we can't store the user's password in just plain text. So what we want to do is we want to make sure we do some kind of a one-way hash before we actually store it. So that's something that we need. And then we're going to need a login form, right? So we're going to create a login form that sends the user's username and password to the server. We're going to then verify the user's identity and use a token library to sign the actual token. And for that, we're going to use JWT, and that's short for JSON Web Token. If you've ever heard of that, this is just one way to do this. And then when the user logs in, we're gonna assign the user a authentication token that contains some state information. That could be their ID, the role, the date and time, for example, that that authentication token was created, all that can be stored in the actual web token itself. And then the user must send a token with each request in the head of the request. And then what we need to do to secure our endpoints is we secure endpoints by implementing middleware at the endpoint level that will confirm these web tokens. So before the request gets to your endpoint handler, what we're going to do is we're going to pass that request through some code that is going to take a look at that authentication token, and it's going to confirm if it's, first of all, if it's something that we have signed and it has not expired, so on and so forth. Once all that comes back okay, we will then send that request to our main handler, which, you know, will give back or will do what it was supposed to do. Okay, so we will be using two node modules for adding token-based authentication to our applications. First is this module called bcrypt, and this is going to be used to hash the user's password for storage and verification. And then we're going to use JSON Web Token, and that's the JSON Web Token right here. And this is going to be used for generating, signing, and verifying these web tokens. And with JSON Web Token, JSON Web Token signs or secures a JS object, and that becomes the actual token. Okay, so this is what makes JSON Web Token a little bit unique, because what it does is just takes a JS object, which we can store things inside. We can store some state inside, and it will sign that object, and that actually becomes the JSON. That actually becomes the web token that is then sent to the actual sign. So we will see that in a bit. Okay, so these are the flow charts for some of these components. So first is the user registration. Right, so let's go ahead and follow these real quick. Okay, so we have the user registration form, which we put our name, email, email password in. That gets sent to our node application. So we first confirm, make sure the inputs are okay. We then hash the user's password. We then assign the user some starting all in that instant, and then we save the user. Right? That gets saved on the DB. So that was the registration flow chart. And then the login flow chart looks like this. So we have a login form, and we put in our email and password. That gets sent to the server, to node application. We first validate inputs. We retrieve the user, right? Because we need to make sure the user exists first. Right, so we retrieve the user. We then compare the password and the hash is what, right? We need to make sure the user's password is correct. Once we do that, then we create and sign the JSON web token. And then once we have a JSON web token, we then send that token to the client, right? And this would become that JSON web token. The client receives it, and the client stores the token in, for example, web storage. Right? So it will store it on the client, on the actual client. So then when we make a new request, we can retrieve the token and include it with that request. All right. And this is how the login request is going to look. Right. So we are going to do a post request to an endpoint. Right. And we're going to pass it an object with our email and our password. And the server's response is going to be, if we get a status of 200, which means our authentication was okay. And if it's okay, we should receive the JSON web token. It's going to be that right there. Okay, and then when we want to get to something that is secure, what we do is we first, from the client, so this is from the client side, we are going to retrieve the JSON web token. That's step one. It's right over here. We are then going to make the request, and we're going to pass that token along in the header of the request. Right? So that's the web token right there. Right? The server is then first going to make sure that token is a valid token. Right? That's this step right over here. And then we want to make sure the user is in this correct role to access that, right? So it's a two sort of step thing. So first we need to make sure the actual web token is a valid, non-expired one. So that's number one. And then we need to make sure, does that specific user have access to this endpoint, right? And that's going to be based on the user's role. Right? And once these two things are okay, then the request just gets sent to our usual handler that handles that request, and our node server sends a response back to the client. And this is how that access to a secure endpoint will look. So let's say this is that secure endpoint here. So we need to include this authorization header component in the request, and the web token goes right there. And if everything is okay with this web token, then we just get a response, right? So if we get a response of 200, in this case, if this is a secure endpoint, then this means that access was okay. Right? All right, we're almost done here. We can jump to actual code. So this is showing you how we hash the user's password using bcrypt. So we just refer to bcrypt. We use this function called hash sync. We put what we want to hash, and then how we want to salt it. Right? So this number 10 here is going to be the strength of that. Okay, so this you usually want to stay to stick with this number. So this is going to return that hash that we then store. Okay, and this is to compare a plain text password to a hash. Okay, so we refer to bcrypt. We use the function compare. We put the plain user's password here and the hash password there. And if this password hashes to that, then this BC result would be true. Right? So then we can do an if statement here. So if BC result, then it means that password is correct. Check. All right, almost done. One more, then a few more slides here. Okay, and this code here is using JSON web token to sign a token, and I have a mistake here. So this should not be encrypted. We are not encrypting here. Okay, so that needs to go there. Okay, we are using JSON web token to sign. Okay, so what we do is we require JSON web token. We have our key, right? We have our key that remains on the server. This key is very important because if somebody gets access to this key, it would mean that they can sign their own opens, which means that they can essentially act like your server, right? Which we don't want. So we want to make sure this remains very secret, and usually you don't want to store this in code. And once we get to I believe module 13 or so, what I'll do is I'll show you where you can actually store these things so they're not in your actual code. So, but at least for now it's okay. Actually have it in code. Okay, so now when we want to create our JSON web token, like I said, it works based off of a JS object. So this is that JS object that we say we want to use to sign, right? So when we sign this JSON object, it turns into that random set of string. So that's the actual web token that gets sent to the client, right? So that means that we can put whatever we want in there, right? We can put the user's ID. We can put the first name. Well, we usually don't want to put anything like that, but we do want to put the user's ID there. And more importantly, we want to put the user's role in there, right? So this is going to determine what the user has access to. That's going to be in the JSON web token. Right, so we store that object. We don't store it. We actually we create that object, and then we use a JSON web token to sign it. Right. So when we sign this object, we pass that object and pass the key that we want to sign with. Right. So the actual object and the key that we want to use, and this is what's going to return that JSON web token, which we then send to the client. And should fix this. This is not input yet. Okay, and this is to confirm that the token is a valid token. So again, we're going to use that key. We're going to use the same key actually. So this has to be the same key. And then let's say we have our JSON web token here. So we use this function verify, and this function verify is going to take that web token, take the key, and if this doesn't throw any exception, it means that it's good. And more importantly, we get our original object here. Right? So this is going to be the original object that we created in this slide, right? So that contains the user's ID, the user's role, things that we want to store, some state. All right, and that's it. So what we're gonna do now is convert our application. Not convert our application. We're gonna add authentication to our application. Let's close that out. So the goal here is going to be that we want the user to first have an account and be logged in before they can add a new task, and before they can edit, and before they can delete. So adding, editing, and deleting, we want to have it so the user has an account. Okay. So let's first start out with installing what we need to install. Right? So we're going to need bcrypt. That's right over here. So we're going to add that. And then we're going to need JSON web token. So let's install that. JSON web token. And that's this one right over here. So we're going to install that. Okay. Okay, so we're going to start out with the user registration endpoint first. So this is going to create a new account, right? So we're going to go to the users endpoints, right? It's going to be the users here. And we are going to create a new endpoint. Okay, so let's go up here, and this is going to be the user registration endpoint, right? Which will have an endpoint path of API, user, and register. Okay, so this is going to accept something that looks like this. So it'll have the account email, so name at someserver.com. It's going to have a password. Say the password is ABC123. And it's going to have the person's name, right? For example. The name. All right. Okay, so we're going to say router.post. The endpoint path is going to be /distro request response. All right. So the first thing we're going to do here is we are going to check to see if the user's account exists or not. Okay, so we're going to do that by referring to the user MongoDB collection. We're going to use the function find one, okay, and we're going to do a search based on the user email, and the user's email is going to be stored in the request.body.email. We have an error and we have a result. Okay. So the first thing we'll do is we'll check the error, make sure we don't have an error. So if we have an error, we're going to send a status of 500, and we'll just send the error to the client. Okay. And if we have a result, what does that mean? Well, in this endpoint, if we have a result, it means that the user already exists, right? So we can't create a new account for a user that already exists. So if this result is defined, then we're going to send a response with the status of 400. And we're just going to send a plain text, for example, that says user already exists. Okay. All right, so at this point, we know that the user does not exist. So we need to create a new user object. So let new user equal to new user, and we're just going to use the request.body object there. Now we need to hash the user's password. So hash user password and salt it. So we're going to refer to our new user. We're going to refer to users plain text password. And we're going to set it equal. We're going to refer to bcrypt. It'll help if I import it. Fire bcrypt. All right, so we're going to refer to, sorry, we're going to refer to bcrypt dot hash sync. So we're going to take the user's plain text password. So new user dot password and the salt string, and we'll put the number 10 there. Okay. So this is just going to take the user's plain text password, hash it, and then store it back where the plain text password is. Okay. And then finally, we need to save the user account. So we'll say new user dot save. We have an error and we have a result. If we have an error, then the status of 500, and we send the error. If we don't have an error, then we send a status of 201 here. So a 201 means that something that did not exist has just been created. So a new user has been created. So we're going to send a status of 201. And then we're going to send the result object. All right, so let's confirm this works. Before I do that, I just want to make sure my user schema has all the components that I need. Right? That was a schema that we created last week. So it's going to need a first name, last name. It's going to need an email, which is an index. That's what we want. The user's password is a string and is required. And I think that's the only required field. Yeah, that's it. What we want to also do, I think, at this point is let's make sure the user's password is a strong password. So let's do that while we're at it here. So I'm going to go to regex 101, and I'll do a search for strong password, see what comes up. Okay, I don't want it too crazy, because this is just an example. This is good. Pretty simple. This is just, okay, so it needs to be at least 8 characters. It needs to have one number, one lowercase, one uppercase, and one special character. That's fine. Okay, so let's go ahead and grab that. So we don't want the password to be too simple. So we don't want to set it here. I will come back to that. Yeah. Okay. I will. Okay, so let's see if this endpoint works. So let's run this. Get our endpoint path. Go to rec bin, and we want to go to /API/user/register. Right, we want to do a post request there, and we're going to go to content, and we are going to create our new account. So we're going to need the first name. So I'll put April, last name, May, email. We'll put something that we don't forget. We'll just say April, May at gmail.com. And the user's use password. The password will keep it simple. We'll just do ABC123. All right, so let's send this and see what we get. All right, we got a 201, which means that the user was created. And you can take a look at our object. So we can see the password now has the hash password. And so this is what the hash is for this ABC123. And again, the main idea behind this hash is that we can't go from this back to ABC123. So if somebody gets a hold of this hash, in theory, right, they don't know what the actual password is. So they can't get to ABC123. And that's the idea there. All right, so great. So we got that. Okay, so let's work on the login endpoint. I think that would be the one to do next. So let's break that down below. Okay, so this is going to be the login endpoint. It will be API user login. Okay, and we're going to accept a object that's going to have the email. So for example, main.server.com and the user's password. For example, ABC123. Let's actually put April, May here. April, May at gmail.com. Okay. All right, so router.post / login request response. Right. So the first thing we need to do here, we need to look for the user to see if they exist. Right? Because if the user is trying to log in, they assume that they already have an account, but we can't assume they already have an account. I mean, not we, I mean, when we're creating this endpoint handler, this endpoint handler can't assume that user has an account, right? So what we need to make sure is we need to make sure first the user actually has an account. So for that, we're gonna refer to user. We're gonna use the same function find one, and we're gonna find by the user email address. So request.email and error results. Again, we're going to check if we have an error. We're going to send a status of 500, and we'll send the error to the client. And if we don't have a result, right? If not result, what that means is that the account does not exist. So if the account does not exist, we're going to send a status of 400. And we're going to put invalid email password. Now, why do we want to put invalid email and password and not just something like that account does not exist? That's because we don't want to give too much information, right, to whoever's trying to log in, because they might be trying to brute force this, right? And if they know that an account exists, that's giving them some information there, right? So they know at least that username or that email exists. So they don't need to be concerned about that part anymore. So by saying invalid email or password, you're making it not so clear what the issue is. It might be the email that's invalid. It might be the password that's invalid. So that's why we want to have it say something like that. Okay, so once we get past that, it means that at least the user has an account, right? So at this point, the user has an account. So step one would be is compare the user's user's sent password to the stored hash. And for that, we're going to use bcrypt again. So bcrypt, we're going to compare. We're going to compare the user sent in one. So request.body dot password, and we're going to compare it to the hashed one that's stored in the result. Right? So result dot password is going to be the stored hash. And error BC result here. That's the bcrypt result. And here we do that if statement. So if BC result, so if that's true, it means that this password hashes to that hash, right? Which to us means that if BC result is defined, the password was a match. I see your question, Roger. So it is, if a hacker gets a hold of a database of encrypted passwords, they could still write a program of passwords, encrypted password to figure out the password. Okay. You don't want to store the password encrypted. So I think you mean if they get a hold of a DB with hash strings. Because if you have a password that's encrypted, it means that there's a way to decrypt it. So as long as they find the key that was used to encrypt it, they can just decrypt them all. So you don't want to do that. So yeah, so you mean hashed. So the question is, if we store the hashed passwords, right, can't somebody brute force it, right? Which means that if we have stored, for example, if the password ABC123 will hash to the string, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0, right? Let's just say this plain text password will hash to that. And if we stored this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0, and somebody gets a hold of this, can't they just brute force it by taking every combination, hashing it themselves, and comparing it to the stored hash? And that's why we salt that, because when we salt it, what it does is it will append some random string to your original. So it'll append some random string to this and then hash it. And the idea is that it makes it a lot harder to brute force it, because number one, two of the same passwords won't result in the same hash. And number two, the attacker needs to get that salt to also include it to be able to then try to hash it and whatnot. So in theory, yes, it can still be done, but that's why we want to make sure our stored passwords are, more than 8 characters long, contain a special character, uppercase, lowercase, numbers, all that stuff, because the longer it is, the longer it's going to take to brute force it. Right? So that's going to be the idea. The question is, how does Google know what password was used in the past? So they store the hash. That's how they know. Right? So they just store the hashes. So when you change your Google password, what it does is it takes the existing hash and it stores it. And then when you try changing it again, what it does is it gets the hash and it'll compare it to the stored hash, and it sees that if it's there, it means that that password is something you have used in the past. So that's how it works. Is what Roger mentioned method or rainbow table? Yes, that's what that means. Yeah, so like I said, we can't 100% we can't 100% prevent a brute force attack, but we just try to make it as hard as we can, right? And the thing that helps the most is making sure that the password exceeds a certain number, because the longer it is, the more combinations it's going to take until that hash comes up, right? So that's the idea there. All right. We were here, right? So if the BC result is defined, then the password is a match. Okay, so at this point, the username, oops, I have all in caps. Okay, at this point, the username and password are valid. We know that. So now, let's say this is step 2, is we need to create and issue the JSON web token. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create that plain JS object that's going to be our web token. So we'll call this payload. So in this, we're going to store some things. So for example, let's store the user's unique ID. So we'll store ID there, and we'll set it, we'll get it from the result dot underscore ID. Right? That's going to store the user's ID. And we also want to store the user's role. And we're going to get that from the result dot role. Now, I forgot to add that to the schema, so let's go ahead and do that. Just realize that. Okay, so let's go back to the user schema. And under password here, we will create a new field called role. And we want this to be a type of string. And we want the default role to be just the user. So this should just be like a standard user. And we want to only be able to select between 2 roles. So we'll create it down here. So we'll have a standard user role, and we have a admin role. Okay, so we have a standard user and an admin, and by default, the user is going to be a standard user. Okay, so that's how I wrote that. Now, realize that I created that account there, so I'm going to have to remove it and recreate it so I get this role field in there. So I'm going to do that. All right, so now that we have the role in our schema, this will now be good, right? So again, this is the object, right, that we are going to sign using JSON web token, and this is what's going to be the actual token that we then send to the client. So the client is going to have this object stored somewhere on the client, right? But the idea here is that they cannot change it. So they can't change the role from a standard admin to from a standard user to an admin and send you that web token back to the server, because to be able to do that, you're going to need that key, right? And that key is only on the server. So that's the reason why it's so important for that key to be secure on the server, is because if the client or somebody else gets a hold of that key, they can create their own web token and assign a role that they want, right? So that's something that you want to do at all costs. All right, so that's going to be our JSON web token. And now what we're going to do is we're going to actually create the token and define it. And to do that, we're going to say let token equals to JSON web token, which I forgot to import. So constant JWT require JSON web token. Okay, so come back here, JWT dot sign. We want to sign the payload object, and we want to use the key of, for now, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, and you don't want to have a key like this at all. Okay, this is just for this example. Right? This key must be really long. So this is just for now. Okay, and then once we have a web token, we are going to send the token to the client. Okay, so we're going to say response dot status of 200. We're going to send an object, and we're going to put the JWT as a field, just like that. Okay, and I believe I'm missing an if statement for this. So if this doesn't come back true, right? If this BC result is not true, then we're going to need an else statement here. And we're going to again say that this is a result of 400. And again, we're not going to be specific. We're just going to say invalid email and or asterisk. But as you can see from the code, we know exactly what the problem is. The problem is not the email here, right? The problem is this bcrypt came back false, which means that the user's plain text password doesn't match the hash. But again, we don't want to put invalid password there because that gives a hint, right? That means that at least the account exists, right? But again, we don't want to be specific here, right? Okay, very good. And I think that's it. So let's give this a try. We'll stop it and start it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to first remove this account that I created because it doesn't have that role field in there. So I'm going to need the ID here to, let's create another React bin tab, and we'll delete it. So endpoint URL, user, and we put the user's ID in the URL. So we grab that. That's going to go there, and we're going to do a delete request. Right? So that's going to delete our account. Now that it has been deleted, we can recreate it. So I'll just leave this the same. We will send it again. This time we're going to have a role, which is just going to be a standard user. And if you were taking a look at this password hash, you should have seen that now this isn't the same hash. This is the same password, but the hash is not the same. All right, so that was the creating an user. Now let's try to log in. So let's open up a new tab for that one. Reactbin.com. Okay, so we will change this endpoint to login. And we go to content, and we're going to need two things, right? Email is going to be, let's first put an email that does not exist. So we'll just say abc@gmail.com. And the user's password, again, we'll just put something that the email is not correct. Okay, so email password, and it looks like we have a syntax error. All right. Post, login, let's give this a try. Okay, so we get a 400 of invalid email password. Again, we don't want to be specific here, right? So first, let's fix the email. So that was aprilmay@gmail.com, but leave the user's password as ABC. Try that again. Again, we're going to get the same 400. And now finally, let's put the correct password, ABC123. And this time, we get a 200 with our JSON web token. So this token here, right, this set of, this random string is this object, but the signed version of it. Now, what's neat about this is that it doesn't attempt to hide this object. So this object that we have signed, the end user can actually view it, which should tell you that you don't want to store anything that you don't want the user to see, right? Because if you do, then the user has the option to see it. Now we can take this, so I'm just gonna do a Control C, and I'm gonna go to jwt.io. And it has this debugger here. And what we can do is we could paste that JSON web token in here. And when we do that, you're going to see the payload here. So this was the object, right, that we had. Let's go up here. Right? So we store the user's ID, right? That's the user's ID. And we store the user's role. And that's just the standard user. Now it's going to add this IAT, which is a date and time of when this token was activated. So we can, if we want to compare this to the current date and time, we'll have an idea. We'll know exactly when the server came up with this. Right? So all that information is stored in this key here. Right? So then you might say, well, can't the user just make themselves an admin? We'll just put admin there and we get a new, okay. Well, you can do that if you have the private key. And that private key is what goes in here. So if we actually put so if we actually put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? The actual private key that we use to sign it, now we have actually created a valid token that we can send back to our server, and our server will think that it created it, and we are now an admin. Okay, which is the reason why this private key cannot go out, because if this private key gets exposed, your application is not secure anymore. Okay, but if you do not have the private key, you can still view that object. Okay, so just keep that in mind. All right, so we get the JSON web token, and once we work on the client, what we're going to do is we're going to store this. Yeah. Okay, so now let's move to the authentication component of it. So that is going to be when the client now sends that token back to the server, we need to confirm that it's a valid token, right, before we give the user access. So the way we're going to handle that is with Express, we have something that we haven't seen before. It was there all the time. We just didn't really go over it. And that is any one of these endpoints here that we have. Let's just take, for example, this one. Let's go to the to-dos actually. And let's take, for example, this one to create a new task, right? Here we have our request response. Well, it turns out that you can have as many request responses as you want in this. And this is how that's going to look. So I'm just going to bring this down to a new line like that. And I'm going to add another request response and next. Again, another open curly brace, close curly brace, and a comma, right? So this is the first handler now, and this is our original handler. But the key here is that when the request gets to this endpoint handler, it is first going to pass through this one, right? It's going to first pass through this one. So this is number one. And then we have the ability to pass that request to the next handler by calling the function next. And when we do that, the request gets sent to our original handler, right? So this is a path now we have put in place that the request has to pass through before it gets to our original handler. What this is going to now allow us to do is check the JSON web token, make sure it's correct. If it's all good, we're going to call the function next, like that. And when we do, it's as if this didn't even exist, right? It just gets sent to our original handler. Our original handler is going to do what it needs to do, and it's going to give a response. However, we also have the ability to end the request in this handler here. So if the web token comes back as expired or invalid, we can just end the request right there, and it's not going to reach our original handler. In a way, we have now blocked access to this handler here, right? All right. So that's the idea. However, there is one thing that we want to do is that we don't want to put the JSON web token check code in each handler like this, right? Because if we tried doing that, we would have to repeat this code over and over and over again. So instead, what we can do is we can do something like this. We can say let handler equal request response next. And what we can do is we can just put handler here. And we'll move this back up to that line. Okay, so now we have something like this. Right, so now when the request comes in, it'll first pass through this thing we're calling handler, which is this thing right over here, which is going to be the code that we put in here. And if here we call the function next, then it gets passed to our original handler. So now with this, we can put this handler in any endpoint that we want to secure. Right? So if we wanted to secure this, we would just put that handler in there. Right? So now the request for this has to pass through this handler before it gets to our original. So on line 65, I missed the I. Thank you for that. Oh, wait a second. What am I doing? I missed the L. Oh, got it. Yeah. Okay, so this will solve that problem. However, we have another issue now. If we do this, is that how about if we want to secure more endpoints in other files? So if we want to secure endpoints in here, so now we have to create that handler in here. Again, we're going to repeat code. So what we're going to do instead of doing this is we are going to move this code to its own AS file. Okay, so we're going to create a folder. And we're going to call this middleware. And inside of this folder, we're going to create a file. We'll call it off.as. And now what we're going to do is we're going to move this handler inside of auth.js. So you know what? I think I want to rename this. Let's say auth authenticated user, auth user, auth user.js. Okay. So now instead of doing let handler equal to that, we're going to say module exports equal to that. Right, so we're going to export this handler out. And in this module, we're going to need access to JSON web token. So we're going to require it. All right. Okay. So let's remove that. All right. So now that we have that, let's come back to our to-dos, and we're going to add that here. I'm going to say constant auth user equal to require. We're going to go up one into the middleware folder, and we're going to get access to auth user.js. So now every endpoint we want to secure, all we got to do is just add auth user to, just like that. So we want to secure this, we want to secure this, and we want to secure the delete. So we add auth user to that, right? All right. So now let's go ahead and add the code that goes in here. Right. So the things we're going to do in here are we need to read the authorization header of the request. And the authorization header is going to look something like this: authorization colon, the authorization type, and the web token. And with a token for us, it's going to look something like authorization, a pair, and then our JSON web token like that. Okay, so this is the format. So what we're going to do is we're going to first read that. So we're going to say, we'll create a constant here. We'll say auth header, and we'll go to the request. We'll go to the header of the request, and we're going to read the authorization. Okay, so here we're just going to read the authorization header, which is going to give us this information right over here. Okay, so first thing we want to do is we want to make sure we have that. So first, make sure the auth header even exists. We can't assume that it does, right? So if the auth header does not exist, if this authorization header doesn't exist, then we're going to end the request. So we're going to send a status of 401, and we're going to send access denied, no authorization token provided. Right? That's the problem here, right? All right, so if we have it, so now we need to make sure it's in this specific format, right? So let's do that. We'll say const, we'll say auth array, because we want to convert this to an array. We want to split the string into an array. That way we can read the first part and we can read the second part. So we'll say auth array equals to authentication header dot split, and we want to split based on an empty string, which is this space right over here. Right? So this is going to give us a 2-item array, right? The first item of the array is going to be this, and the second item of the array is going to be that. Okay, so first well, actually, we don't need to check we don't need to check that. We'll just check the actual web token there. So we'll say if we don't have that, so auth array, the second element, that's it, which is auth array index 1, right? If that means that we don't have the JSON web token there, then again we're going to end the request. We're going to send a status of 401. We're going to send access denied. No authorization token provided. Okay, so we just got to do one check after another here. Okay, so at this point, we know that we have one. So we'll say const token is equal to auth array index 1. So that's going to be our JSON web token that the client has sent us, right? So now at this point, we need to make sure that it is a valid or web token. So we're going to put this in a try catch block. So we'll say const payload, and we'll use JSON web token to verify this. And we're going to pass it the signed token and the key 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So this key must be the same key we used when we were actually coming up with this web token, right? Okay, so now what this is going to return is this is going to return that original object, right? That was this original object right over in the login, right? Yeah, when we logged in. That was this object right over here. So we're going to get this object now in here. And what we're going to do is we're going to assign it to the request object. So we're going to say request.user equals to that. Now we don't need to call this that. We can call this anything we want here. So we just say we want to store it there. So we're going to add a new object in the request with that. Right? And we want to pass it to the next handler. Okay. If we catch something here, it means that this was not good, right? It means that there's something wrong with our JSON web token because this is going to throw an error. So if that throws an error, we're going to catch the error and we're going to send a status of, again, 401 means we don't have access. And we're going to say access denied, invalid token. And that's it. Okay, so let's give this a try. Stop this and run it. Okay. So first we want to do is we want to access the one that we secured. Right. So let's go to to-dos, and it was the creating of the new task here, right? So remember, we had added this auth user, so the request is going to pass through this, and that's when we're going to check all that. And if it all comes back okay, right, then we are going to call the next function, and when we call the next function, it's going to pass this request in response to the next handler in the chain, which is going to be our original handler, which is going to create a new task or update the task. Okay, so let's go ahead and try to create a new task now. So we have our JSON web token there. So we're going to have to use that. And let's open up another rec bin window. Okay, so the idea now is we want to create a new task, right? So API / to-dos right? We want to do a post, and we want to create a new task. So it's going to be an object, task, and the task, we'll just put, just to test and see what happens. All right, so look at that. We get a 401 unauthorized. That's what a 401 means. And we have access denied, no authorization token provided, right? That's because we didn't include it, right? So that authorization token, at least using this tool, is going to go in this authorization tab under the bearer token here. And under this bearer token, we have this token field here. So first, let's put an invalid one. So we'll just put ABC. You know that that's not a valid web token. So let's see what happens there. So let's hit send. And we're going to get another 401. This time we're going to get invalid token. Right? So we have provided the token, it's not a valid one. Let's take a look at the actual request head. So we're going to go to the raw here, and we're going to see when the client send a request. Over here, actually, you see that it now includes this authorization header, which is a bearer, and this was the ABC that they put there. Okay? So it's now part of this, part of that request. Okay, so now finally, let's put a valid token in there. So I'm going to get the string all the way to the end, copy that, go to the authorization, put that token there. Now if I send it, I get a 200 and the task was created. So I essentially now secured this input, right? So you need to first create an account. You need to log in, get a JSON web token, and then pass this token along with the request to a secure input. Okay, so let's do one more thing here before we go to the before we work on the client. I know we're a little bit past time here. I apologize for that. But I need to get through this thing. All right, so this auth user is just going to confirm if the user is if user has an account. That's it, right? If you know, if user is able to log in, that's all that this is going to do. But what we also want to be able to do is we want to also be able to control our endpoints based on the user's role. Okay, so we're going to make another file in here, and we're going to name this admin role dot KS. And in this handler, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at that payload object, and we're going to take a look to read the role that we stored in there to see if the user is an admin. And if the user is an admin from that role, then we pass it to the next handler. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. Module exports, again, request, response, next. Okay, so we know at this point the token has been verified, and the JSON Web Token payload should be in the request.user. We stored it in there, remember? So that's where it's going to be. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to check if that object does not exist. So if the request.user does not exist, then we're going to send a status 401. User is not authenticated. Right? Because if they don't have this object stored in the request, then it means that it didn't pass through this auth user handler, because this auth user handler is what stores that payload in the request.user. So that's what this is going to first check. Now we're going to check to see if the request.user.role is equal to the string admin. Right, so if the user is an admin, then we pass it to the next handler. So pass the request to the main handler. Else, we're going to end the request for 1. Send. Now we're going to say unauthorized access. Right, so they're authenticated, but they don't have access to it, right? Which means they're not in the correct role. So now that we have this admin role handler, let's add that here as well. So I'll just copy and paste it. So this is going to be admin role and admin role. So now we have the ability to first make sure the user is authenticated, which means that they have an account. And second, if we want only admins to have access to this endpoint, we can now add admin role to this endpoint here. Right? So now the request has to pass through these two, right? It first has to pass through auth user, which is going to make sure the user has an account, valid, open, so on and so forth. After all that comes back okay, it's going to get passed to the second handler. This handler is now going to check to make sure this user is in the admin role. And if the user is in the admin role, it's then going to pass it to the next handler, which is going to be our actual handler there, which is going to give the response. If something happens that's not good in any one of these handlers, then we can end the request and it'll just end at that point, right? We can either end the request in this handler or we can end the request in that handler. And if we do that, then we will not get to the main handler there. Okay, so let's give this a try. So here we're saying that to create a new task, we need to be authenticated and an admin. And we know that we're not an admin at this point. So if we try to create another task here, we'll just say new task. So we have the authorization token, but remember our authorization token has the role stored in it. And the role stored in this is a standard user. Okay? So it's not going to work. So if we try to now add, we got to restart the application. Okay, so let's stop it and restart it. Okay, so let's try this again. So we'll say JWT. And we should get a 401, right? 401, we have unauthorized access. So what would we need to do to now be able to create a new task? Well, the first thing we need to do is we need to update our role. Once we do that, we need to re-authenticate to get a new ISON web token that has our new role, and then we need to send that web token to this handler to be able to do a new task, right? To be a new task. Right. So For now, I'm just going to remove it, so I don't want to have it so the user has to be in that role. We just want to make sure the user, if the user just that's it. Okay, so now that we have confirmed that, let's go ahead and move to the client and see what we need to do on the client. Okay, so on the client, we need a login and a user registration form. And for those forms, I'm just gonna cut and paste from some HTML that I already have here on my screen. And it's going to save some time. Okay, so we have this registration view and this login view here. So if we refresh this, we should get a user registration form and a user login form. So let's now add the out for this. Okay, so first we're going to work on the user registration. We're going to select the register button and on look this function. Right, so we're going to say let registration info. So we're going to need the first name, and we're going to read that from the first name new txt dot val, and I will just copy and paste this to save some time. Okay, so we need the last name, we need the email and password. So this is the last name. This is the email and password. This is going to be last name. This is going to be email, txt, and password. Right, so that's going to be our object. And then we're going to make an AJAX request to the URL, API, user register. Type is going to be a post request, content type. It's going to be an application JSON. The actual data, we're going to stringify it, JSON stringify registration info. And if we have a success, we have a success. We're going to refer to that. We're going to refer to alert div, and it's going to have the ID register as alert. And first, we're going to show it. Then we're going to set assign it a text successfully registered. Please log in. Right. And if we have an error, action error, we're going to refer to the same div. And we're going to show the error dot response text. Right, so that's going to handle the registration part of this. So let's now move to the user login part. So the one that's a bit more important. User. All right, so we're going to refer to the sign in button. Click. Okay, let login info equal to, we need to pass in the email. So we're going to read that from the form. Email txt, wow, and the password. Password txt. Wow. Okay, and we need to do an AJAX request to the server, which has a URL of API, user login. Type is going to be a post. Content type is going to be application JSON. We're going to send JSON data. So JSON.stringify result login info. Okay, success. We get a result. So here, what we need to do is we need to store the token, right? Because this is going to be our login. And when you log in, we're going to get that JSON web token. And we need to store it on the client. Right? So what we're going to do is we're going to store it in local storage. We actually have two options here. We can store it let's use session storage instead. So if we store things in here, it will be removed once we close out. So once we close out the tab, it'll be gone. So session storage, and we're going to use a function set item, and this is going to accept a key value pair. So the key, we want to store this as JWT. So this is going to be our JSON web token, and then the actual token itself, we're going to get that from the results, JWT. Right, so that's going to actually store it. And then we want to let the user know. So we'll go refer to that login pairs alert, and we're going to show it. And we're going to set a text of login successful. Okay. And if we have an error, again, we are going to refer to that div. So I'll just copy paste it. And we're just going to display that. Okay, so let's do a console log. Actually, let's not do a console log. Let's do an alert here of this result.json web token. So when we do log in, we'll actually see it. Okay, so let's give this a try. All right, so email, we have aprilmay@gmail.com. Password, let's just put an invalid one for that. Okay, we get invalid email passwords. Now let's put it actually one. So that was ABC123. And sign in. And there it is, right? This is our JSON web token, which is going to be actually stored in the session storage under the key JWT. Okay, so now that we have stored it, we need to now include it when we want to create a new task. Right, so let's go ahead and do that. Right, so we need to first find find the endpoint for creating a new task. So let's do that. That's going to be under the post, right? Where's the post? Right over here. Okay. So the only thing we need to do here is we need to add that authorization authorized header to this request. And that's going to be under the object of headers. So under this object of headers, we're going to add the authorization. Right, that was that authorization header. And we're going to set it to there. And we're going to append onto that the actual web token. So we're going to get that again from the session storage. We're going to use the function get item and JWT. Right, that's going to read that JSON web token included there, included in the authorization header, which is essentially doing what we did here. Right, we went here, we put the authorization token there, and the raw request look like this. So we are essentially recreating this here. Okay, so let's give this a try. Let's refresh. We are already logged in, but it's okay to do this. Go ahead and do it again. So April, May. Actually, let's actually log out. So we need to add a log out button here. So let me go ahead and do that. Because we do need to be able to actually log out. Let's add it. I don't know, add it down below here. Like this. Okay. Right under the plugin viewer. Okay, so we'll have a button here with an ID of logout, UTM, a type of button, class of button, button danger, and we'll say log out. Okay. So that's going to be our logout button. I know it doesn't look good right now, but that's okay. Okay, logout button. So what do we need to do there? Let's create an event handler for it. Logout UTM. Click this function. And all we're going to do is we're going to delete this. So we're going to say session storage, and I believe it is delete item, JWT. So we're just going to delete this JWT, our web token from storage. And when we do that, let's send out an alert saying you have been logged out, essentially, right? So, oh, I think this is remove item. We will see. Okay. So we did that, and then we did the JSON web token part where we want to put in the task. So that's done as well. Okay, why are we not seeing the tasks? Let's refresh this. Something is going on here. We're not getting our tasks. We have a syntax error somewhere, I think. Let's see. Oh yeah, we have a missing curly brace on line 209. What did I do? Line 209 headers. I put a semicolon there. We did not need a semicolon there. All right, so we got objects back. Okay, so let's log out. Okay, you have been logged out. And now let's try to create a new task. So we do test, and we get access denied, invalid token. That's by design. Okay, so now let's log in. So we will log in as April, May, Gmail, ABC123. Okay, we're gonna see our web token there. We get login successful, and now we should be able to add in a task. Right, learn JWT and learn JWT. Okay, so we still won't be able to edit and delete, so we need to add this to those as well. So I'm just going to copy that, go under delete task, and we need to include that authorization header for that, for the delete, and for the update as well. And there we go. So now, if I'm logged in, I should be able to delete and make a change. And if I log out, then I will not be able to delete access denied. And I can't create a new task. And there we go. So that is authentication and authorization. And again, the key here is really in, what was it? The key here is really how these endpoints are actually handled, right? So we are able to pass the request through another handler and stop the request if we have to. And if things are good, then the request get passed on. Right? So now we can secure any endpoint we want by just adding this auth user in here. Okay, I know we did a lot. Are there any questions? We went way over today. I'm sorry about that. No. All right. The assignment for the week is going to be just about what I did here. So as long as you have this example file that I just did, you should be good there. Okay, so just go through there. It'll ask you to make a change to your schema. So you're going to make a change to your schema. You're going to install these two things, right? Bcrypt and JSON web token, and then you're going to create those two endpoint handlers, one for the account to activate the account, and one for login. So something I realized here is I didn't test this here, so let me give this a try. So Smith gmail.com. Let's set this password to 1234567 Register. User already exists. Really? I might have a mistake here. Let's do John Smith one. Whoa. Yeah, I have something going on here for sure. Oh, I guess I don't have something going on. Okay. All right. abc@gmail.com. I believe I put abc123 there. So let me try this. John's abc@gmail.com. abc123. Yep. So that's work. And just to confirm, let's go to mongodb.com and take a look at these that we stored. Okay, we're going to go to collections. We're going to go to the to task DB under users and take a look at our users here. So April Smith, right? This is the one I created last week, I believe. John Smith. This is the one I created last week as well. And these are the ones that we just created today, right? The April, May, which has the hash, right? So that's the user's password there. And I created this other John Smith with abc@gmail.com. And that has that hash password as well. And the user's role. And so we should remove these. We don't need these anymore. All right. Any questions? Any questions before we leave here? All right, everyone. Thank you for joining. Please let me know if you do have any questions. And we'll see everybody next week. Have a great week, everyone.